packed agenda today. Welcome everyone to the Utility Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act, just transition to renewable heating and cooling. My name is Lisa Dix. I am the New York director of the Building Decarbonization Coalition. The Building Decarbonization Coalition is an organization of industry, energy providers, manufacturers, distributors, environmental, climate justice, and other organizations committed to just transition in building decarbonization and fully decarbonized New York in the building sector by 2045. I am honored today to host a wonderful group of panelists to talk about the Utility Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act. What we're going to do today is that we're first going to have a presentation by an amazing visionary and author, a national expert on thermal energy networks, and a member of the International Codes Council for the Uniform Mechanical Code, JAG. John Murphy, who is the New York International Representative for the Plumbers, Pipefitters, Sprinkler Fitters. And he is also part of Climate Jobs New York and the Energy Coalition, and an expert on energy himself. And wanted to introduce also Jessica Azulay, the Executive Director of Alliance for a Green Economy, fearless leader of the Renewable Heat Now Coalition, and one of the top experts in the state of New York around Public Service Commission gas distribution system and planning dockets and utility rate cases. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a presentation by Jay. Then we're going to have some remarks by John Murphy and Jessica Azulay. We're going to then take about 10 minutes or more, if we have some time, on questions and answers. So before we get started, you know, a lot of people have asked me, wow, how did you all come together and get this amazing piece of legislation passed in the 11th hour of this 2022 legislative session? And I just want to say that it's a little bit of serendipity, a lot of deep listening and conversations, and a lot of searching for answers that we all were asking about how we decarbonize buildings at scale in New York, and a lot of commitment to a just and equitable transition of the decarbonization of the building sector. So we talked a lot, we visioned a lot, and we listened a lot. And we really found something that we all agreed on, which is that we wanted utility scale decarbonization solutions for buildings. We were all committed to a just and equitable transition for workers and for communities, ensuring that workers are uplifted in the clean energy transition. And it was this amazing, this amazing vision that we all created in terms of really focusing on something that we all agreed on. It wasn't just this, oh, we have to give up something, or, hey, let's leverage for this or that. It was literally everybody agreed on something that we all wanted. And so what we did is it was a truly collaborative effort. We created something and put it down on paper. We decided that we wanted to vet it with the legislature. And I have to tell you that it was an amazing, it was an amazing exercise because, you know, at the end of the day, I think if folks didn't see it, the legislation actually passed unanimously in the Senate in the 11th hour, 2 days before the end of session, and nearly unanimously in the Assembly, 143 to 6. the last day of the legislative session. So what does the legislation do? I just want to give a super high level. One of the things that it does in our conversations, we realized that there was a lot of barriers to scaling thermal energy networks. And so what it does is it removes the barriers to the utilities development of thermal networks. It requires the Public Service Commission to commence pilots, 5 for each utility and in every utility territory. It directs the PSC to develop a regulatory framework for the utility energy networks at scale while ensuring affordability. It mandates adherence to the CLCPA greenhouse gas emissions reduction mandates and equity mandates. It requires pilots in climate impacted communities in compliance with the CLCPA, and it mandates labor standards and promotes union jobs for utility worker transition and for local residents. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the visionary and amazing Jay Egg. Jay?
Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I feel so honored to be a part of this effort. I really don't feel worthy to be a part of it, but it's great. I'm grateful to be able to share some of the vision of this Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act. It really started, and Donovan Gordon, who's on, as well as Bill Nowak and many of the others, were involved very early on when New York City Council was concerned how they were going to convert 900,000 of their 1.1 million buildings to geothermal. When we understood, most people understand that you have to drill boreholes to do that. And what we helped them with this image you see on the screen, what we helped them to understand in a presentation back in around 2015 to the New York City Council is that with a thermal energy network, you don't have to have these boreholes at each building. The main thing that needs to happen is there needs to be a hydronic or a water-based fluid pipeline that runs strategically through the city in a series of loops like you see here. And this thermal energy network pipeline provides a conduit for energy to be piped from building to building, and it's anchored by heat sources and heat sinks in strategic locations. Some of those can be wastewater heat recovery. Some of those can be structural energy piles under buildings. Some of those can be, for example, the subways, which are a tremendous resource for energy, both heat source and heat sink. One of the most important things to realize as you consider a thermal energy network in a city, and this is true of cities whether you're in Albany, whether you're in Toronto, whether you're in St. Paul, Minnesota, your commercial office buildings are typically going to be cooling dominant. Now, what that means in lay terms is that those buildings have extra energy even during the -20°F days of the winter. And why is that? Because they're so filled with equipment, people, and computers. And if you ever want to confirm this in your own mind, which most people like to do, you would just take a look at a city skyline during the middle of the winter when it's snowing, and you will see steam plumes rising from the top of the buildings. You might wonder what those are. Those steam plumes are from cooling towers that are typically exhausting the heat from the central energy plants. And that heat is the extra heat from the people and computers and equipment in those buildings. So while your commercial buildings are exhausting the heat, your people in your apartments and so forth are paying exorbitant amounts of money for natural gas and other combustion fuels to heat their spaces. So what a thermal energy network does is it takes the energy that previously or currently is going out through cooling towers and air-cooled condensers, and it's now piped into the thermal energy network and piped over to these buildings that need this heat. Now these buildings can use that heat through a geothermal heat pump to provide the heating and cooling in that building. Now it's important when you look at these two different types of systems. When I say two different, I'm talking about air source heat pumps like you see over here on the right, and geothermal heat pumps like you see on the left. An air source heat pump is a renewable energy piece of equipment. It uses outdoor air as the exchange medium to provide heating and cooling in the building. But the problem becomes when the colder it gets outside, the harder it is to extract heat. And then there's another caveat. You are dealing with an air source device, and the only thing it can do is extract heat and reject heat to the outdoor air. When you're dealing with a geothermal heat pump, which in its primal, most basic iteration is tied singly to a borehole or a geothermal exchanger in the ground, it is a water-based heat pump. So it extracts heat from water that is running through this loop in the ground. So when you get to the situation where you're looking at a thermal energy network, then and you can see kind of these loops under these houses here, that's great, but most of the heat can now come. You don't need these under the houses and buildings anymore, because as you can see with these exit arrows, they're trying to indicate that these two buildings here, these commercial buildings, have extra heat. So it's exhausting heat through this thermal energy network pipeline. And then these single family homes and these other commercial and mixed use buildings can take the heat from the thermal energy network. With thermal energy networks, it's important to note some of the most amazing benefits come that most people don't think about. You eliminate outdoor equipment. You find that and think about Superstorm Sandy, you're more hurricane and storm resilient. Why? Because you have no outside equipment that can be affected by the weather. And if you don't have outside equipment that can be affected by the weather, just like you see with this condenser out here, then the system lasts longer. And that's an obvious thing because it's not subject to the summer heat and the winter snow and everything else. You eliminate combustion boilers, you eliminate cooling towers, you eliminate furnaces, which meets the decarbonization goals that we have set up through the CLCPA for New York. You have noticeably superior comfort in both the heating and cooling modes. And that is a function of heat transfer and thermodynamics. Very simply put, if you have a standard or a more normal medium temperature of the ground or the thermal energy network, you're going to have better cooling and you're going to have better heating. And in addition to that, heat pumps provide much more comfortable heat because they don't drive out the moisture because of the high temperature of the burners. Heat pumps will help you to keep more normalized and humid heat in your space. The remarkable system efficiency, untouched by any other type of heating and cooling system, is available at standard equipment prices. In other words, once the thermal energy network is put in, this heat pump, this geothermal heat pump, is no more expensive than an air source heat pump. As a matter of fact, it becomes more of an appliance grade piece of equipment, which is much easier to install because you don't have refrigerant lines going from the outside to the inside. It's just one piece of unitary equipment. So by the time you look at all this and understand that all we're looking at, think about city water, city sewer, and all of the other city infrastructure, once the infrastructure is in, it's permanent. And so you don't have something to replace outside like you would normally have with an air source heat pump. It's just part of the infrastructure. So what you end up with is these large infrastructure projects that look exactly like we've done in the past with drinking water, with sewer, and with natural gas pipelines. You may know this, or you may not, but during the 50s and 60s, the US installed more than 2.5 million miles of natural gas pipeline to more than 40 million customers. It is not a difficult thing to imagine that we will do the same thing with thermal energy networks. It is easier than natural gas pipelines because it's not combustible. It's a pipe filled with fluid. Think of a central water infrastructure. It's pretty much the same thing. These pipes that are going in are filled with fluid. These taps go to buildings. What you see here would probably do something the size of a 50-story building. It's a simple pair of taps so that they go into the distribution network for the heat pumps and the central energy plant. And this is kind of how it looks like. Now, we might think that this is something that's new, and I love to share this because in the 1950s, at the same time as our infrastructure was adding natural gas pipelines like crazy, the National Electric Manufacturers Association was trying to keep their market share because they sold electric appliances such as air conditioners and even heat pumps were coming out back then and so forth. So they had this really cool thing, and this is Ronald Reagan here, who's one of the spokesmen for Live Better Electrically. And you would get these medallions, these total electric medallions on your homes and businesses to prove out that you were an all-electric safe home or business. And that is indeed what we're going back to with this decarbonization and building electrification effort. Now let's get into something really cool. Air source heat pumps and geothermal heat pumps are both renewable energy all-electric devices. But there is a problem, and the problem we experienced winter before last in Texas, where they had that cold snap and they almost destroyed their electric grid. Why was that? Well, there were a lot of things that contributed to that, but here is one of the prime movers. When you have a cold snap and you have electric heating appliances in homes, such as electric heat strips, air source heat pumps, space heaters, and what have you, you're going to experience an electrical spike. Now, that electrical spike is what everybody is fear-mongering about. That electric spike cannot be managed with air source heat pumps alone. That is why the thermal energy networks are so important. And you can see this laid out for you at the ASHRAE building in Atlanta, where in 2010, they installed on the first floor air source heat pumps, and on the second floor, geothermal heat pumps. ASHRAE is basically the epicenter of HVAC, or heating and cooling technologies, for the world. And so they did this to see what it would do to energy consumption. So if you can see here in the middle, June, July, and August, the geothermal heat pumps are performing better than the air source heat pumps. That's a given. It's going to, because it's going to be 100 degrees outside, but in the ground, in Atlanta anyway, it's 60 or 65 degrees. So the heat pumps are going to operate as efficiently as if it's 65 degrees outside. But here is the real key. In the wintertime, November, December, January, February, even March and April, when When the cold temperatures come, the air source heat pumps spike dramatically. Look at this. This is what the fear mongering is about with regard to electrification. When you hear our electric grid cannot handle the load that will be put onto it by beneficial electrification in the wintertime for wintertime heating, yes, they're right. If you're using air source heat pumps, this is what's being used here at the ASHRAE building. The best industry had to offer in 2010. And guess what? It isn't really a whole lot better now. The same efficiency improvements that air source heat pumps have for cold climate now, we also have for geothermal heat pumps. Remember, it's the same technology, and it's not a fair comparison because the geothermal heat pumps are using what? The ground. It's 65 degrees year round. So while the air source heat pumps are peaking dramatically in January and December, what are the geothermal heat pumps doing? They are less, they have a lower peak demand than in the summertime. What does that tell you? This is what I'm going to tell you what it tells us. Whatever our peak demand is right now for our electric grid in the summertime is going to be less in the wintertime as we convert over using thermal energy networks, because it's going to be exactly the same as what we experienced here. We can handle with our existing electrical grid the peaks in the winter because they're going to be less than the peaks in the summer. And there's more that I want to share about that I will in the next few minutes. But I want to show you just another example, just so you think this isn't just Atlanta. This is Oklahoma, two identical buildings built in Oklahoma, one with air source heat pumps. Now, it shifts on this graph. The winter, December, January, and February is in the middle on this graph. So you see the winter peak here, and you see exactly the same corrected for square footage going on with the geothermal. You see a levelized grid load profile with the geothermal. It's not rocket science. It's because it's tapping into the earth. While the air source heat pumps, it's not even a fair comparison. How can you expect an air source heat pump to operate this efficiently when it's -20 or it's 0 degrees outside? So it's not an unfair comparison. It's just a fact. That's the way it goes. Now, in order to understand the rest of this, we're going to get into, for just a few minutes, how heat pumps are rated, or how any appliance is rated for that matter. They're rated in something called coefficient of performance. And the coefficient of performance has to have a basis. And that is identified by understanding that 1 kilowatt of electricity equals 3,412 BTUs. A BTU is a British thermal unit, and it's the basis of energy transfer or energy measurement. So an electric space heater that you can buy and put under your desk or in your bedroom will burn 1 kilowatt of electricity and deliver 3,412 BTUs. A geothermal heat pump will use 1 kilowatt of electricity to run a heat pump, not to burn electricity. It runs a pump. The pump is a compressor that pumps heat from the ground into the space. So for 1 kilowatt of electricity, you will get 5 kilowatts because it's going to pump 4 kilowatts of energy from the ground or from a thermal energy network, delivering a grand total for the same energy, 17,060 BTUs of heat into the space. It takes 20% of the kilowatts to do the same heating with a thermal energy network. And that's at a 5.0 coefficient of performance. How do we figure that out? For 1 kilowatt, you get 5 kilowatts. That's very simple. That's the coefficient of performance. Another reason why geothermal or thermal energy networks are important is because if you look around the world at the willy-nilly propagation of air source heat pumps, they are a mess. And people will roast me for this, but this is what you're seeing in third world countries. This is, by the way, heat pumps on top of buildings after a storm goes through. This is what it looks like in Florida on the top of the buildings, even with anchored heat pumps. They get blown about like child's toys. This is New York, and these are kind of handsome, right? You see up here in the top right? Well, let me tell you, those are going to be rust buckets in 10 years. Those are going to be a mess. This is why air source heat pumps, while a great technology, are really hard to work on and really not the final answer. So as we consider this, I want you to take a look at this. This is the difference between a natural gas pipeline and a geothermal pipeline. They both involve a pipe in the ground. Now you think about this just like you do a natural gas distribution system, except this is a renewable energy distribution system. The pipe in the ground delivers in a natural gas situation to a furnace or a boiler, right? And it has up to 95% efficiency through combustion, which creates emissions, and it provides heating only. The same pipe in the ground with the thermal energy network goes to a heat pump, which uses compression or Carnot refrigeration cycle technology, and has 300 to 500% efficiency, and it provides heating, domestic hot water, and cooling. What's the source of the energy? Natural gas, which is consumed in the case of a natural gas system, or thermal energy, which is an exchange with the earth and other buildings in the case of a thermal energy network. Some of the examples that we want to share as we wind this down, let's talk about one of these thermal energy networks in New York City, shall we? This is Penn South. This is an apartment complex cooperative in Manhattan. There are 15 22-story buildings that house 2,500 families just south and west of Penn Station. It covers 5 city blocks. They have, in the wintertime, a 4 megawatt thermal energy load. In this central energy plant here in orange here, they have big boilers that heat hot water and distribute it to all these buildings, and they burn through a tremendous amount of natural gas. How are we ever going to get enough geothermal exchange for 2,500 families in 5 city blocks? Well, let me explain how, using the thermal energy network premise without drilling a single geothermal borehole. Right across the street and to the north here is the USPS, US Postal Service Distribution Center for Manhattan. In this postal distribution center, and this is one of our projects, it's one of the EggGeo projects, one of the many we're working on throughout New York. This has, and the USPS is signed on as part of this thermal energy network, they have an 8 megawatt rejection through cooling towers that just goes up into the atmosphere, even during the coldest day of the winter. Those 8 megawatts, if we tie in, and you can see our scientists and engineers put some pipe sizes and so forth here, what's going to have to be run across, that's not important. If we can turn off those cooling towers and pipe that energy through a thermal energy network right over here to the central energy plant, guess what? They're going to be able to turn off those boilers. That entire 4 megawatts of thermal energy need for Penn South, for those 2,500 families, is offset and to spare. What are we going to do with the 4 other megawatts? This is the point. We have so much excess energy in our cities that all we need to do is pipe it. And so when our energy modelers, with our company or any number of hundreds of other companies that do this for NYSERDA, we model these out, and then you match buildings. This across the street here happens to be the SUNY Fashion Institute of Technology. We also have public schools that are signed on. We just signed on Amtrak at Penn Station, Hudson Yards. By the time we tie all these in, we're going to have excess energy. The combustion heating will stop, and we will be able to do all of this without drilling a single borehole in the city. Most of the energy will be synced to surface water and to the subways and to wastewater and so forth, kind of like the image that we shared at the beginning, right? I'm just scrolling down to get back to that image, so pardon me, right here. So all this extra energy that we end up with ends up going into surface water, wastewater pipelines, but you may not know this, but the subways have to dewater continually. There are thousands, millions of gallons a minute being pumped out of the subways into the East River and the Hudson River. The same thing is true in Albany and everywhere else. We have all this extra energy that we can get rid of. So the point is that with thermal energy networks, and this is an image just kind of showing that Penn, because we were just talking about it to stay with it. This is that Penn South apartment complex. This is how that energy network pulls together. And this is a more scientific rendition of buildings that need heating, buildings that need cooling. That's that USPS station, US Postal Service station. And this is the central energy chillers at Penn South that provide the central cooling. And it doesn't matter what way you do this. There are situations that we're looking at presently that involve amalgamated housing complex in the Bronx. We are working on a project with NYSERDA where we just put in an application to tie in DeWitt High School, the Bronx School of Science, Lehman College, Discovery High School, and the list goes on and on. So with that, I want to leave enough time for John and Jessica to say a few words about this, because I just have silly ideas that happen to work only if people like John and Jessica and NYSERDA can get behind this and actually fund these ideas. So I'd like to turn the time over to John and Jessica. There we go.
There you go.
Great.
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is John Murphy, and I'm an international representative with the United Association of Plumbers, Pipefitters, and Sprinkler Fitters, representing our members here in New York State. So I want to first begin by giving a background of who we are. I'm a member of Plumbers and Gas Fitters Local 1, who were first chartered in 1889. The Plumbers and Gas Fitters work closely with Steam Fitters Local 638 in New York City. They install gas systems and appliances, plumbing and heating and cooling systems throughout all the buildings that you see in New York City, in addition to our locals throughout the state. A building trades member is an hourly worker. If they're not on the job, they don't get paid. And they run the risk of losing their medical coverage for their family and their pension credits. So we continue to struggle to find a true transition for so many members that have made these livelihoods good middle-class jobs for many, many years. The problem is when they hear of pure electrification, it leads to fear. The fear of their livelihoods just being taken away from them. Fear then turns to anger. And what we try to do is change the narrative from electrification to decarbonization, because that's what it is we really want to do. We want to decarbonize. So about a little less than 2 years ago, I read an article about a design, an award-winning design in the Empire State Plaza by Jay Egg. And I was able to track Jay down. And just by that presentation that you saw, you could see why I was drawn to him and intrigued by it, this amazing technology that seems to meet all the issues that we have. I then had the good fortune of being introduced to Jessica and Lisa. And these are two amazing women that had the ability to listen and to learn and to understand. And we realized quickly that there was more we can agree on the common ground, that we were onto something here where we can achieve our climate goals, but truly provide a good transition for thousands of plumbers and pipe fitters that are working on these systems right now, in addition to uplifting the communities that we serve. So we were able to, in this method, we can achieve our climate goals, provide that transition. And if you look at the New York City Building and Construction Trades Council under the leadership of Gary LaBarbera, there is a direct entry program in place now that works, where percentages of every apprentice class comes from vocational schools, it comes from non-traditional employment for women, New York City Housing Authority, and helmets to hard hats. These programs exist. Trying to expand these programs to WDI throughout the state of New York to have workforce development and pre-apprenticeship requirements on many of the projects. So working with this team, Jay Egg was pulled into the fold, and with his brilliant design, we realized that we can solve the problems that we have in the state while not only preserving middle-class jobs, but creating thousands of good middle-class jobs. The thing I think stands out the most for us, well, selfishly, besides the miles and miles of piping that's involved, is the fact that during peak seasons, there is no spike on these type of systems. And that's one of the ways that we can make sure that we protect our energy grid. So I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you. I'm so glad that Jay and Jessica and Lisa were able to put this together to present to more people, really the opportunities we have with thermal energy networks. Jessica?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Azulay. I'm the Executive Director of Alliance for a Green Economy, and I'm so happy to be here today talking about thermal energy networks. And I just want to thank John for sitting down with us and, in a true spirit of collaboration while we listen to each other to find our common ground. And we're so thrilled that we discovered by talking that we all had a real passion for thermal energy networks, and we were really excited to try to get them done in New York. So I want to talk a little bit about how my organization, Alliance for a Green Economy, came to be excited about thermal energy networks as a critical solution for decarbonizing buildings. We do a lot of policy in New York, trying to move the state toward 100% renewable energy. And in addition to the policy work, we're also an implementing organization. We run a local program called Heat Smart CNY that works in the city of Syracuse and in the surrounding counties of central New York to try to help people learn about weatherization and heat pumps and make the switch in their own houses. And through this program, we've really been able to see the challenges that people face when trying to adopt heat pumps and do energy efficiency. And we've also seen the amazing benefits that people get from weatherizing their homes and switching to heat pumps. And even though we have one of the most successful programs in the state, we're also seeing that not enough people can make this switch yet. We are seeing a lot of challenges in the city of Syracuse where drilling geothermal wells on individual properties is a challenge because we're on a salt aquifer and it's very expensive for the drillers to come do that. And we are seeing that this individual house by house approach to heat pump installation, while it's growing in pace, is not scaling fast enough to meet our greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So as part of our implementation work, we also, and our policy work, we're also the only environmental group at this point that intervenes in all of the major utility rate cases in the state. And these are cases where the utilities have to come and say what infrastructure projects they want to or need to build, and ask the Public Service Commission to allow them to charge for those infrastructure projects on our bills. And through our interventions in these rate cases over the last 5 years, we've seen billions of dollars going into the gas pipeline infrastructure in the state that we feel could be used to go into thermal energy networks and go into building decarbonization if we had the right policies in place. So we learned about thermal energy networks from Jay and other experts, and we quickly realized that this could be a universal solution for people in an entire neighborhood to decarbonize while reducing the impact on the grid, spreading the costs out across many customers and many years the way utilities do. And the thing that's holding us back is that the Public Service Commission won't allow utilities to build these yet. We have seen and have supported utilities proposals for pilots in utility rate cases in the last few years, and these pilots have been blocked by the Public Service Commission. So the law that we worked on together changes this. And when this law is enacted, we're going to see utilities be able to build the scalable solution that provides so much opportunity for our communities and a transition for the workers in the gas utility space. So I really appreciate everyone for coming on here and learning about this with us. And I think I'll hand it back to Lisa to take some questions.
Great. I just wanted to thank Jay, John, and Jessica for their presentation and remarks. If folks have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and I will do my best to synthesize them and ask as many as we possibly can within the next 10 minutes. So first of all, there's several questions in here about cost, both in terms of the installing a ground source system and the lifespan and paybacks. John or Jay, maybe, Jay, excuse me, I think that this is a good question for you to answer. What are the, kind of estimated costs of one of these systems? And if the payback time for, building owners or individual customers like in these systems?
Great, that's a very good question. And it doesn't have a completely clear answer. I would like to give an example of why it doesn't have a clear answer. The natural gas pipe system costs an average of about, and it varies, it depends on where you're doing these estimates, but new natural gas pipe systems cost an average of about $25,000 per house to put in. Geothermal central energy systems, thermal energy networks, it depends, because if you're doing a thermal energy network for a high rise like you saw with Penn South, one of those buildings is going to house 500 or 250 families. So that's going to cost a lot less per individual or per apartment than single family homes, for example. So the answer is all over the place. But the way that NYSERDA is laying this out right now through their community heat pumps program, which, by the way, if you want to know more about that, I put in the chat to everyone that they're having an expo all day next Tuesday about this, about how to get involved. So I would highly recommend anybody who's interested in this, click that link now and save it and register for that expo on Tuesday, because they're going to have a lot of people that are a lot smarter than me there actually presenting about thermal energy networks. So the point is, if you think about Con Ed or National Grid or InPower, or I'm sorry, or Enbridge, or any of the large energy companies, they are commissioned by the PSC to put in energy networks in the form of electricity grids. And natural gas pipelines. The way it's looking right now is that people that are regulated, such as the utilities, that's what this law is about. It recommends or requires every utility in the state to do these 5 pilot projects, right? So what it ends up being is it's something that's amortized over what utilities use normally is the 60-year amortization. So what happens is that is something that's paid for by all the ratepayers. We've done it for a century, and we will continue to do it that way in many situations. So the real answer is here. You're going to get a thermal energy network installed at some point in the next couple or 3 decades, and it will be something that you just simply tie into. So the payback, I don't know. I'm not a financial guy. I can tell you on district systems we've done at college campuses and other municipal downtown districts, they pay back in under 10 years, sometimes under 6 or 7 years, but everyone's going to be different. So that was my long-winded answer. I hope it helps.
Great, thank you so much. We have a bunch of questions that I've looked at. And again, if you want to ask questions, please don't put them in the chat. Put them in the Q&A function. I'm not managing the chat, just the Q&A. I find there's a lot of interesting questions about that intersect with both, how is this a job transition for utility workers and gas utility workers in particular? And also, what are the training programs needed and by who? And so maybe, John, you can take those questions.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm happy to answer that. So if we just look at one example, National Grid in Brooklyn, they have over 1,600 members that maintain the gas grid. This is a case where utility workers would be able to transition from maintaining a gas grid over to a thermal energy network. Labor unions train for this all the time. My industry itself have been doing train the trainer for about 1.5 years right now. So it's all paid for by union apprenticeship programs, by their members, privately funded, and we provide the training for that transition.
Great. I want to also add to that in the bill itself, the bill does provide for prioritization of training in transitioning utility workers, as well as pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs for folks that are in local communities where these pilot projects will actually be cited. So that's part of the bill. The bill also, which is super exciting, provides really high level labor standards, prevailing wage and project labor agreements for these pilot projects. So that is a lot of really important new, some old, but a lot of new ground that has been gained in really ensuring that thermal energy networks, and as we build them and test them in New York, are going to be good quality union jobs.
Well said, Lisa. And if I would just say again, in the building trades model, all we need is that pipeline of work ahead of us. We need that work. Then we can uplift communities. We can bring people in, and it's an entrance to the middle class. It's a proven model.
All right, there are some super interesting questions that are really aimed at, in how is the vision here in terms of the utilities going about monetizing this? And then there's some questions here about, are there municipal or local power solutions within this model? And I think maybe Jessica, do you want to take a stab at that?
I can take a stab at how utilities may go about monetizing this. I'm not a utility financial expert, but I do see how utilities operate in their rate cases. So, there has been a pilot of one of these systems. It was a district geothermal system on Long Island. And it was a National Grid project. And what National Grid did with that project was it spread the costs of that project across the gas ratepayers. This was an alternative to gas in their system. And they charged the participants, the houses that connected to that system, a fixed cost every month to be connected to the system. National Grid proposed a pilot in upstate New York a couple of years ago, and they also proposed a fixed cost. That one was a fixed cost by the number of, by your heat pump capacity. So if you have a heat pump that's connecting to this, the capacity of your heat pump times a monthly fixed charge would be the cost to you for the system. So one of the things that we're hoping to do with this law, and the reason we're starting with pilots, is because we're not sure how utilities should charge for this yet. Jay might have some ideas for that. But this is one of the new things about allowing utilities to build these. When they're done on college campuses, it's a single owner and they own all the buildings, and they're don't have to worry about charging multiple customers. The utility needs to make the upfront investment and then recuperate it over time from the customers. And so we're hoping to see the utilities pilot some different ways to charge these, the different ways to create rates around these systems, to figure out what is most appropriate and what is most fair and just for the communities and customers that connect to these systems. So it remains to be seen exactly how utilities will recuperate the costs from customers and how they will set the rates. But we will all have a say in that, because there will be a Public Service Commission proceeding that determines this. And we love helping people get involved in Public Service Commission proceedings. So contact me if you have ideas for that and you want to be involved in that proceeding.
If I might jump in very quickly, I would just like to say, Jessica, that almost every one of the questions I've seen will be answered at the NYSERDA Expo on Tuesday, which is free and available to all. So if you didn't get my message to everyone, I'm going to put it in the chat one more time, and I want everybody to click on that link and register for that expo, because they're going to get answers there. It's an 8-hour expo. You're going to get a lot of it, and it's next Tuesday.
Great, thank you. And I do want to point out that, in addition to these pilots, NYSERDA is also moving forth and venturing, into the thermal energy network space. And they have been thinking about and now soliciting RFPs for a couple dozen pilot projects, which Jay, maybe you want to just kind of give a little bit more background here on that.
So the pilot project, and Donovan Gordon, who's the director of Clean Heating and Cooling, and Will Shaw, who's the director or the senior project manager for the Community Heat Pumps program, they both could answer this better, and they will on Sunday. There also will be a representative from the U.S. Department of Energy, Arlene Anderson, there. So what they are doing is these community heat pump projects, they're well vetted. And what we have to do is similar to what you saw with Penn South there. We have to identify a customer who is willing to get really engaged and involved. And then what NYSERDA has us do is get letters of support from all of the, from any and all of the people that would be willing to become part of the thermal energy network. And then what NYSERDA does is funds the scoping study, then they fund a feasibility study and construction drawings, and then they'll help fund the actual construction of the project. Now, in our case, Con Ed is one of our advocates. Con Ed is ready to hire the contractors, the mechanical contractors, and so forth once they've identified the project and it gets funded. And so in every case, it'll be a little bit different. Maybe in another case, it'll be National Grid. Maybe in another case, it will be a private energy services company. I really don't know how it's all going to pan out, but that's why they have the community heat pumps program there, so that NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, can figure out, by tapping all of the brilliant minds out there on what ideas we have, all of us have collectively that might work, and then they vet these ideas, they review them, and they fund them if they're a competent idea. And this is it is, by the way, aside from this thermal energy networks and jobs bill. That's aside from this, but they're both working in lockstep, one with another, in my view.
Lisa,
Jessica?
I see some folks in the chat asking where the expo is. Jay, is that a virtual expo?
Yeah, oh yes, it's absolutely virtual. We can
Okay.
you can see, everybody can just jump online and see it. So do it from the convenience of your office or iPhone.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to wrap us up. Unfortunately, there are so many great questions. I feel like I've kind of tried to cover the buckets that were being asked. This doesn't have to be the last time we talk. And I want to just say that, you know, the reason why the legislation was drafted the way the legislation was drafted is because we actually do have a lot to learn, right? And so this is what the spirit of this legislation is. It's the spirit of, how can we scale these? What do our rate structures look like? How are we going to ensure the maximum affordability for ratepayers and customers? What does this transition look like? What are the training needs? How are we going to be moving these training needs forward, and by who? And so this is what, you know, that's just like kind of a big high level of what we're going to see as these pilot projects, if we get this signed into law, which we need to get done, right, with the governor, as a really immediate next step. This is really just an amazing learning process over the next year, so that we can set up one, with all of the learnings, a more permanent structure, and build off of what we are learning from at the utility level and at the commission. So I look forward to all of your engagement, and we will continue to have this conversation for the next, maybe forever. So I want to just thank again, Jay Egg, John Murphy, and Jessica Azulay. And I want to thank all of you for taking an hour this morning to spend with us to learn more about the Utility Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act. Thank you all, and have an amazing Friday.
Thank you. Happy weekend.